Wilhelmina Kohl had until spring before the family took the land back, and a Lake Superior winter that could kill a person in the open in under an hour. She was 62, and German among Finns, married into the Kohl family 15 years before, and settled at Keweenaw Bay, where in 15 winters she had learned to live the Finnish way as naturally as she cooked on a Finnish stove. Her husband Paavo had died that October of 1887. No children of her own on the bay. No claim the family would honor. No home past the thaw. Paavo's brother Eino managed the family's land, and he was a careful, courteous man. He came in November to explain that under the original agreement, Paavo's share reverted to the Kohls, that Wilhelmina was welcome to the main house through the winter, but that come spring, the property would belong to Aino and his sons. He was sorry about Paavo. He meant it. What Aino never thought about, because no one in that settlement ever had, was the small log building behind the house that every Finnish family owned and used all their lives without once realizing what it could do when the cold turned deadly. The Bay decided the German widow was a woman waiting to be moved along. By the time the deep cold came off the lake, the neighbors whose houses were failing would be crossing the snow to the one building on the coal place that had never been meant to be lived in, and to the widow who had understood, before any of them, exactly what it was for. He said she was welcome to use the old sauna on the property for as long as she liked, since it was too old for regular use, and the family intended to tear it down in the spring anyway. He did not mean it as a consolation. He meant it as a courtesy. Wilhelmina thanked him. She waited until he was gone, and then she walked out to the old sauna. The old sauna was older than the house. Paavo's father had built it when he first claimed the land, in the way that Finnish settlers built their saunas first and their houses second, because the sauna was heated more easily than a house, was sealed better against the cold, and could serve as shelter while the house was under construction. The walls were hewn pine, a foot thick, chinked with moss and clay that had been maintained and repaired for 40 years. The door was the original door, low and heavy, tight in its frame. The kiuas inside was stone, a good Finnish-style pile of granite, built to hold heat. Aino had said it was too old for regular use. The roof needed work, which was true. 2 of the wall logs on the north side had softened slightly, which was also true. But the structure was fundamentally sound. The kiuas was intact. The door sealed. Wilhelmina spent December making the repairs. She was not a frail woman. 62 and German-raised, and 15 years in the Finnish settlement, had built a constitution that was not easily discouraged. She replaced the worst of the roof boards with lumber she pulled from a collapsed outbuilding on the property. She rechinked the north wall logs with new moss and clay. She cleared the chimney flue of bird nest debris. Then she fired the kiuas for the first time in 3 years. The granite stones took a long time to come to temperature. She fired steadily for 4 hours before the interior reached bathing heat. But when it came, when the stones began to radiate, and the air in the small enclosed space rose to the temperature she recognized from 100 saunas in her 15 years at Keweenaw Bay, she understood immediately that she had made the right calculation. The sauna was 11 feet by 9 feet. The walls were a foot thick. The stones in the kiuas weighed, she estimated, about 250 pounds. At full temperature, the interior was over 160 degrees, and after the fire was banked and the sauna cooled to a livable temperature, which took about 2 hours, it would hold that warmth in the stone and the log walls for many hours longer than any ordinary house could hold a comparable heat. She moved her bedding in the next morning. The arrangement that developed over December was simple. She fired the kiuas every evening, let it run for 3 hours, then banked it and moved into the sauna as it cooled to a comfortable sleeping temperature, usually between 75 and 90 degrees. By morning, the interior had dropped to perhaps 55 or 60 degrees, which was cool, but perfectly tolerable. She rekindled in the morning, left it burning on a low heat while she did her work in the house, and returned in the evening for another cycle. The fuel consumption was very specific. A Finnish sauna kiuas burns hot, but does not need to burn constantly. The stone absorbs the heat and holds it, and once the stones are charged, the fire can be reduced significantly. Wilhelmina had Paavo's woodpile for the main house and a separate small woodpile she had cut for the sauna, and both were adequate because she was running the sauna intelligently, not extravagantly. By Christmas, she was warmer than she had expected to be. The house was cold because she was not heating it. The sauna was her residence, and she left the house to fend for itself. The sauna was warm. The cold that descended on Keweenaw Bay in January of 1887 was of the kind that the old Finnish settlers called pakkanen, the frost, as if it were a presence rather than a condition. The temperature dropped to 31 below zero Fahrenheit, and the bay, which seldom froze solid for 3 miles from shore. The lake beyond the bay stayed open. Lake Superior is too large and too deep to freeze, but the wind off the lake was brutal, a sustained north wind that drove through any inadequately sealed structure. The main houses in the settlement, most of them frame construction of American style, lighter than Finnish log buildings, faster to build, more common by the 1880s, were poorly suited to this kind of cold. They leaked heat through their thin walls and inadequate doors, and the wind found every gap. Families burned wood at rates that were alarming if sustained, and sat in their kitchens with the stoves at maximum and were still cold. The Finnish log houses fared better. The old-style construction, heavy logs, tight chinking, small windows, low doors, was designed for this. Several of the older families who still lived in their original log houses reported being no more uncomfortable than in any normal January. The saunas, where they were used, were warmest of all. On the 4th day of the cold spell, a Finnish woman named Eino, who was Eino Kohl's daughter-in-law and who lived in a newer frame house on the Bay Road, came to the Kohl property to ask Wilhelmina if she could use the bathhouse to get warm. The frame house had been inadequate for 3 days, and Eino's youngest child had developed a fever from the cold. Wilhelmina opened the sauna door. The sauna was at sleeping temperature, about 80 degrees, because she had fired it that morning. Aino came in with the child and sat for an hour in the warmth, and the child's fever began to ease. Aino asked how the old sauna was this warm when the newer buildings were not. Wilhelmina explained the kiuas, the way the stone accumulated heat and released it slowly, and the log walls and the tight door and the small space. She said it was what the old Finnish builders had known and what the new buildings had forgotten. Aino was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My grandfather's sauna was like this. We tore it down when we built the new one." They knew what they were doing, Wilhelmina said. Over the week of the cold spell, 5 families from the settlement came to use the old sauna. Wilhelmina kept it fired at a steady temperature and let people use it in shifts, morning and afternoon, keeping the worst affected children and elderly warm through the hardest days. She cooked soup on the sauna stove. A Finnish sauna can cook, and she knew how, and fed people who came cold and left warm. Eino Kohl came on the 5th day. He stood in the doorway of the sauna he had offered her as a courtesy, the sauna he had intended to tear down in the spring, and looked at the people warming themselves by the kiuas, and smelled the soup, and felt the heat that was, as it had been for 6 weeks, reliably extraordinary. He did not say much. He stood for a while. Then he told Wilhelmina that the sauna was not going to be torn down in the spring, that he intended to repair it properly, and that she was welcome to continue using it. Wilhelmina thanked him. He said the roof work would need to be done properly, by someone who knew timber. She said she had repaired it herself in December, and if he would like to inspect it, it would hold. He inspected it. It held. She lived in the Kohl sauna for 2 more winters before Aino, who was a pragmatic and not a mean man, formally arranged for her continued use of the property in exchange for maintenance oversight of the sauna and the surrounding buildings, a role she had been filling, unofficially, since November. The arrangement suited her. She was 62 years old, and she had found, in an 11 by 9 foot sauna that was 40 years old and had been destined for demolition, a warmth that was, by every measure that mattered in a Keweenaw Bay January, as good as any house. Better, in some conditions. The kiuas had known that all along. If this story made you think of someone who found the old way worked better in the end, leave their name in the comments. And if you want to hear more, the women the frontier overlooked and what they quietly kept warm, subscribe. New stories every week.